For an exclusive, Mondo creates an imposter. Here's your look at the Masters of the Universe. This is the Faker 1/6 scale exclusive figure. By the power of Grayskull, you too can have the power. Mondo is proud to bring to you the third in their Masters Universe 1/6 scale figure line, Faker. Featuring over 30 points of articulation, fabric, costume elements, and a lot of accessories, this is the most powerfully fake figure you will ever find from here to Eternia. Mondo exclusive, the Mondo exclusive version also includes an interchangeable battle damage portrait, a limited edition of only 750. Before we get a closer look at Mondo's exclusive release of Faker, the first thing we're going to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. Speaking of Mondo, I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at Mondo who made this review possible. If you guys are in the market of picking up the Faker for yourself, some good news, you can currently find it over at Mondo's website right now. I'll provide the link down below. In the meantime, though, according to my trusty tape measure, the 6 scale rendition of Faker stands at 12 inches exactly. And that in centimeters, switching that over right now, you're looking at a figure standing 30.6, a little over 30.5 centimeters tall. And as he's certainly faking the most powerful man in the universe, He-Man, certainly for a comparison, we can bring in the Mondo release of He-Man, the 6 scale version. Short of changing the armament that's wrapped around its torso, the figures are pretty much identical to one another, sharing very similar, if not identical, molds to one another, left to right. Again, what will change, though, is the front armor piece that's on his torso will be a little bit more skeleton-like or Skeletor-like versus He-Man's more traditional armaments. But other than that, and of course a different swap of paint, the two figures side by side here are identical to one another. Certain, I'm sure that He-Man will be making a reappearance later into this review, as of course we do some comparisons side to side with his imposter self. In the meantime, though, let's have a look at the accessories that come included with the figure. He comes included with one said display stand, done here in matte black plastic. It so happens to be the same stand as well that we also got ourselves with the 6 scale release of both He-Man and Skeletor, so nothing really has changed here. Still a bit strange on the design for the display stand. If you spin it around to the back, it looks more to accommodate the idea that they wanted to use the M on the bottom. But again, like, the stands are generally quite small. I mentioned this both in the review, I'm sure, of both He-Man and Skeletor, that the stands, if they had maybe gone with a slightly more larger stand, it probably would accommodate the wider footprint, even if you're displaying your figure likely in more museum poses like I'm currently doing right now. Faker's feet still fall off the edge of the stand, so if the stand was maybe just a little bit bigger, it would be fine. And then, of course, you have your standard adjustable neck along the top with a little cradle support to hold the figure. In this case, you don't have a full curve. Instead, you have more just a straight or slightly warped straight line of wire. This does come up and it does lower down. It could probably have been a little bit longer, only because the figures are generally quite heavy anyways, and because their figure feet already stretch off the edges of the universe, or at least the case of the display stand. If they had maybe compensated by just making this a little bit longer to probably hold the figure in place. I mean, the figure doesn't topple over, but still, by that, it still feels like the figure's feet stretch off to the side. Maybe, again, if they had made the display stand a little bit bigger than what it currently is, it would accommodate both the figure standing in its place and probably keeping it balanced a little bit more than what it actually does. Faker's got a lot of accessories, which we'll have a look at right now. Though he does have a lot, he doesn't have as much that He-Man possessed. And again, we'll kind of do comparisons side to side so you guys can see. For starters, why don't we first have a look at the rifle blaster. Now, this is a carryover to the one that we had gotten with He-Man. I'm just going to reach off to the side and bring that in right now. The mold is identical to one another, though you will start seeing a familiar pattern of color used with all of Faker's accessories. It's pretty much the same accessories as He-Man, just more done in an orange copper color, which works quite well for, of course, accessories for Faker. I kind of dig the design of having things in orange. Orange has always really been one of my favorite colors. If you look at, though, the two rifle blasters side to side, they are identical to one another, short of, again, the fact that they simply have just changed the color from this more black and silver treatment to the coloring more, again, of this sort of orange copper color with accents done also in gold. You've got the wrappings done in the handle section of the blaster done here in black, both the front and the back. But other than that, I mean, like I said, there's nothing different between the molds. They haven't tweaked them at all. They simply, like Faker, have taken the initial design and simply just changed and swapped the color. And then, of course, as I mentioned, he doesn't have all the accessories that He-Man possessed, for example. Like He-Man came, for example, with a little pistol, a little laser pistol, for example. Faker doesn't actually come included with one of those, instead only gets the blaster, the longer rifle. I'm fine, really, for the idea that Faker sort of gets slimmed down on the accessories that come included with the figure. Would I ever really display this figure, for example, with the pistol? Probably not. So I'm not too disappointed that he doesn't actually even have it. One of the other accessories that doesn't come included with Faker either is the broadsword that came included with He-Man. Instead, you still get the battle axe and you still get the power sword, and again, two things I would be more inclined to display with the figure. So not too disappointed that he didn't actually come with this, the broadsword that came with the previously looked at He-Man. He does, however, come included with the battle axe, and we'll bring in He-Man so you can see side to side again, like the rifle blaster, they are identical to one another. Again, instead of using the more silvers and this off sort of copper color, it's kind of not quite sure, it's kind of a more goldish color of bronze. Instead, they actually go again to that treatment of orange, which works really, really well with all the accessories. Again, all the things for Faker are pretty much going to come in that same sort of orange palette. Now, this one is a little bit closer to more copper color, as you will see things with, like the shield, for example. They're more the vibrant orange that you would come to expect. Other than that, though, I mean, if you look at the two side by side, there's nothing really different between the two. The decos are done the same, as well as the little pointed tip is exactly the same between the two. I didn't bring Skeletor's battle axe into the mix because his is slightly different, but these ones are identical to one another. Like I said, just a different coat of paint that's been applied. Looking at Faker's power sword, this is one that gets a little bit different than the one that came released with He-Man. And it does make sense as to why they changed this. This is He-Man's. This is just your traditional power sword with the noted skull on the top there with the helmet. I like the design of that one. Skeletor's, though, was closer to using the ram skull, which has now been the reuse here for Faker's. The swords are identical. The hilts are the exact same. Again, the only thing that's different between the two is the top that goes on top of the hilt. And again, I think it makes more sense that they didn't do simply just a repaint of He-Man's. Instead, they decided to go with Skeletor's marker on the top there instead. If you look at the two swords, the swords are nicely detailed. I really did like these swords when we initially looked at He-Man. Faker's works quite well also. And again, there's really not too much different. In fact, the swords seem closer in detail to one another. Looking at the two, one thing that's different actually about the Faker sword is the blade itself is a little bit more lighter silver. It actually comes across more like paint than this one right here, which has the more darker gunmetal silver utilized. This part of the sword here, just below the hilt, the guard, I suppose, is slightly, again, different from one another. The paint seems a little bit more single brushed here, in the sense that He-Man's, for example, if you look at the two swords, it seems like He-Man has some additional dusting of darker color to fill in and just bring out some of the details of the cracks and the imperfections of the sword, whereas Faker seems a little bit cleaner in design. It doesn't have as much the stark contrast where you're incorporating those coppers and oranges that we talked about before, but I do think that Faker's sword overall looks a little cleaner in design. If you don't certainly mind, and you can conceal the idea that this one does have the ram horn, the ram skull, you could most definitely even use this one with He-Man because it does have a little bit more vibrant colors, a little less the dark wash, and it's a little bit more cleaner and pristiner in design. Moving on to the figure's sheath, this is of course the sheath that would house the power sword, which we'll just go ahead and right now and slide this in place. It is a very tight fit in the sense that it's not tight to put it in and tight to pull it out, but as you're sliding it through, it almost feels like there's something inside that's catching the sword. Kind of like there's maybe a material that's inside the sheath. The sword itself can be housed and attached to the back of Faker just by using these clips located on the back. And again, we'll bring in He-Man's. We'll just pull this one out here for a second, and we'll bring in He-Man's. He-Man's something that I didn't really realize when we looked at Skeletor. The bottom of He-Man's sheath, of course, is the mask that covers over top of Battle Cat's face. The one that, however, comes included with Faker is the same one that came included with Skeletor. I didn't realize this, that the sheath, let me just remove that little hair there, the sheath is actually, the bottom of it, is a reptile face. More importantly, a snake face. Didn't even realize that when we had a look at the Skeletor before. So even the sheaths are slightly different from one another. The tops are about the same. Even the fur looks like it could be identical to one another, just a different coat of paint, of course. But the bottoms are very different from one another, and I can't even believe that I didn't spot this when we had a look at the Skeletor before. Still getting that sense of deja vu, I'm sure. We'll have a look at the shield that comes included with Faker next. The shield is identical to He-Man's. Just for that, we'll bring in He-Man's shield so you can see side to side. There really isn't anything in this case that has been changed, unlike the Power Sword. The shields are identical to one another. This now brings in more the traditional classic colors of Faker, more the vibrant oranges that I really liked. The blaster, yes, did have that, but all the other things had more muted versions of orange. Here you get a very bright rendition of orange with that copper color done in the center cross area detailing that's done to the center area of the shield. I really like the look of that. It's a nice contrast really of colors. That lighter copper silver color here, the copper in the middle, and then of course that bright orange making up the majority of the color of the shield. The riveted sections are all done in a nice silver metallic paint, and if you flip around and look on the inside of the shield, you get a two-tone effect of this textured intersection that looks like it's kind of like a bluish purple. It looks really nice. If you look again at He-Man's shield, we'll flip his around so you can see, it's a little bit more simple in design. Because He-Man's shield is more traditionally silver, you don't get as much the pop the colors as you get with Faker's shield. We'll spin around so they look a little bit more identical to one another. I still have a bit of the issue with the shield to attach it to He-Man's, or in this case, Faker's arm. What you need to do is you need to pop Faker's hand out of the forearm socket, and you need to attach it to the handle. To make things easy, what they've actually done is they removed this part of the shield, so that when you slide this through Faker's forearm, for example, you then just attach the handle to He-Man's, or Faker's hand. I'm doing it again. So if we take, like, for example, Faker's hand, one of which I'm going to say go use on this side, and you just fit that in between his fingers. Don't worry, you can actually pry the fingers a little bit away from the palm. I want to say forearm, but if you just separate those fingers away from the palm, you can then move and navigate that handle inside like so. And then simply all you're then going to do is, well, we'll probably spin this around this way. You're then going to take the handle section, and you're going to take these two pegs on both sides, and then you're going to feed them very carefully back into those slots. They're very difficult, I find, to pop in place because they are so thin of plastic. You sort of have to hold them from the sides. You really want to resist the urge. I know I mentioned this with the previous reviews. You really want to resist the urge of pushing them down this way. Still, though, I don't find the handles sit very well into those slots, and a lot of times I do find the handles pop out of those open slots quite easily. I'm trying to think of what else they could really possibly have done. Obviously, the idea of having this handle be removable so that you don't have to necessarily display it always with the hand, it does make some sense. Obviously, they could have also just used a hand and sculpted it to the handle, that you just swap the whole piece out, but you're still going to have the problem of these connecting in place. They're not always, again, the easiest thing to pull off, and a lot of times, again, these handle sections, the little sides of the handles, do frequently pop out of those open slots, which is a bit of a shame. And seeing as we were also just talking about hands, we'll have a look at the hands also that come included with the figure. Faker comes with a total of 6. technically, if you count the closed fists that are currently in the forearms, he comes with a total of 6. We'll have a look at those hands right now. He comes with a pair of trigger-firing hands. Best way to describe it. These hands are, of course, best suited for holding, like, for example, the rifle blaster. Just sort of navigate the handle down into the palm, and then just fit it against the inside of the hand, and you've got yourself a perfect trigger-firing hand. He doesn't, again, come with the pistol, which is not really disappointing for me because I probably would never really display him with it anyways. I've actually considered the idea of displaying Faker more so with blasters. He-Man I would keep more to swords, battle axes, and shields. Faker I would almost even imagine more so wielding like laser blasters, so I might actually even just consider displaying him with that. But he does come with one for either side of his torso, depending on which side you want to have him wielding firepower. Then, of course, he has just traditionally gripping hands. The opportunity then presents us where we can now showcase, or I can showcase, the detailing done to the hands. Each one of the fingernails sculpted in place. As you can see, though, the coloring, they've airbrushed some additional darker purple to the otherwise blue hands. The hands themselves actually have several different colors applied to them, and that's even before we have a look at the figure. The primary color is more this lighter blue, and then you've got the darker blue, and then on the inside of the palms is where they sort of started incorporating more that dark airbrushed purple, which looks really nice on these hands. Again, these ones are more designed for holding like the power sword, for example, or the battle axe, or even possibly the shield if that's the way you want to display the figure. Faker also includes 3 interchangeable heads. Technically, he only really comes with 2 interchangeable heads, the primary one that's currently on the shoulders, and then he also sports the more classic design head sculpt pulled from the original Masters of the Universe figures. These are, again, identical pieces to one another. This is the one that came included with the He-Man. This is obviously, judging by the fact that this one has red hair and blue skin, this is the one obviously that came included with Faker. But you can see, it's a nice touch, I have to say, that Mondo included classic head sculpts. Would I not really likely be displaying the head sculpts, these ones at least, the classic designs? I appreciate the fact that they would include it, so certainly those purists that like to design and display their figures more in the classic style can more go the traditional route of using the more classic head sculpts. So again, it's always really nice that they come included with things like these. But going back to one of the other head sculpts, this one right here, this was the one that comes packed with the exclusive version of Faker. Now, the exclusive, this has the battle-damaged head portrait, and this is the one that's limited to 750 pieces worldwide, if you're looking again to pick this one up. It's interesting to kind of imagine what Faker could look like if he, underneath all of this, he had an endoskeleton head, which really does look like an endoskeleton head underneath all of that. I do like the layered look to it, that they didn't simply just paint or simply just sculpt the face close to the one underneath. There's like a little bit of a gap where you can see the top shell of Faker's face and then the endoskeleton underneath that. It's really a nice detailed head sculpt. I truthfully, again, probably wouldn't display Faker with this. It pulls a little bit more away from the idea of him and being an imposter, of course, to He-Man, which obviously anybody would look at a blue version of He-Man and know that it ain't the real thing. But certainly the idea that they would include such a cool-looking, damaged version of Faker is pretty neat, and I'm glad to see that Mondo would include that. At least if you are in the market to pick this one up for yourself, and you don't feel yourself inclined to ever really display Faker with this exclusive head sculpt, the beauty of it really is that you can still get the standard release that basically will have all the stuff that we had a look at, minus, of course, the battle-damaged head sculpt right here. Just to show you what that head sculpt does look like, because I do admit it is pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and pop the head off the ball joint. It's a larger ball joint, but it's still pretty easy to pop that head off and swap it with the one that we want to go with. Simply just apply pressure back in. You'll hear a nice satisfying snap. And there's what the battle-damaged version of Faker looks like with the regular sculpted head right here. The eyes really aren't that much different. Neither is really the nose. The hair also seems to be identical to one another. It's really then the new sculpt that they incorporated to the far side of his cheek, and of course the open open, exposed, damaged area around the area of his mouth. Even like his nose seems to have gotten a little bit of damage just on the tip of it. But again, they're nice, the fact that they are identical to one another, at least in the sense that you could imagine that this would be simply just a battle damage version of this head sculpt right here. Sometimes when companies do a damaged version of a character, they feel compelled to change the expression. Not the case here with Mondo. Instead, they kept the head sculpt identical to one another and simply just incorporated the damaged areas where they actually wanted to add them. So let's get a closer look at the Faker figure. For this, obviously, again, I promised I was going to bring He-Man back in. So again, you guys can see the difference between the two. It does seem as if they've shared the exact same head sculpt. I thought before they might have tweaked it slightly, but it seems actually that it's the identical head sculpt, right down to the hair, right down to the same expression on his face, simply just done in a more bluish, Smurf-like motif. The armament is different, as you can see, the armor wrapped around the chest section of He-Man. This is the more traditional armor here. And then here on Faker, we've got ourselves more classic Skeletor. Now done, of course, here in orange. It's not simply, again, just oranges. We'll put He-Man down here for a second. There we go. It's not simply just straight out orange. There's actually a lot of different colors that they've incorporated here. Even to the center section of his chest has this ruby red stone in the center. And then you've got the additional bronze around that, the silver, and then this dark copper color mixed with those vibrant colors of orange I was talking about before. You've got, of course, that bat motif running across, stretched from shoulder to shoulder. Some additional silver points have been added along the riveted sections here. And then, like Skeletor, you've got these flaps of armor that drape over top of his shoulder. One interesting thing about Faker, you probably are seeing it right now, is that he does have a computer control console underneath all this. Now this does technically involve you removing this, and I haven't really found an easy way to detach this. I don't feel like it's something that you could actually remove, so I'm probably going to keep it in place. But underneath all of that is actually a working, well, not quite working, it would give you the indication that it would be working, like a little computer keypad console on the top of Faker's chest. It's a nice small touch, and it doesn't really take too much away from the torso, where you really see it standing out like a sore thumb. It's still there, but because the armor is over top of it, it still is just giving you a slight faint trace of it, just from really on the sides, on either side there. The skirting of Faker is the exact same as He-Man, also is the exact same as these gauntlet areas. Now these are done in purple, as well as the belt is done in purple, and the front area is still that carryover color of that orange and the copper that I'm really liking so much. The loincloth is still a soft plastic material with some artificially stitched lines down on either side. Somebody wouldn't have actually taken a needle and sewn those together, but it certainly does give you the indication that that may have been the case. I do like the material that they used. It's soft enough. It does feel like it has a little bit of a give to it. And if you do lift this up, you can actually detach these and you can remove the cloth altogether. And underneath of all this is actually Faker's more traditional Master Universe, there you go, his torso underneath there, with more classic designed belts and the fur loincloth underneath that. If you did want to remove this, again, it would involve, I think, detaching this somehow. I think you probably could slide this down. There may actually be a section on the belt that you could detach, though I really haven't been able to find one. But it is there. Like I said, there is the detailing done underneath that. So if you want the more classic looking Faker, it is there if you want it. Moving a little bit further down, of course, you've got his fur topped boots. This is a more darker fur, obviously, than the one that came included with He-Man's. He-Man's, bringing his up, for example, was more a dark brown, where Faker's is a straight-out strong black. The straps done around his boots are also identical to one another, Faker's being dark black, He-Man's being dark brown. Other than that, I mean, like the figures themselves, like I said, are identical to one another. We can spin He-Man around so you guys can see the back of him, and we'll spin around the back of Faker. Short of, again, like the top piece being really different from He-Man's, the rest of the figure itself is, as I said, just identical to He-Man's, just with a different coat of paints, with the different blues, the different colors of, for example, of his gauntlets, and of course the coloring of his armor is now that dark, vibrant orange that I'm really liking a lot. Looking at Faker's articulation, it would be the exact same as He-Man's. His head rotates all the way around, and it also hinges up and down. You get more the drop in the head, where you can have it look lower. The head only goes to about here, and then it doesn't go any further than that. I did notice, though, when you brought the head up, it sort of at times feels like it wants to drop back down. I think it's simply just because the way the open socket of the head, the way it attaches essentially to the ball joint. Let me just pop this off here for a second so you can see. The ball joint sure sits in here, but there's a lot of open cavity on the inside of his head, and I think it causes a little bit of that drop or a little bit of looseness to the head. Again, we'll just snap that in place. You can kind of see what I mean. The head is a little on the loose side. But again, you get a full rotation of head all the way around, up, down, and technically back and forth as well. The arms do hinge outwards. I do feel, if we look at the arms themselves, the way that they're attached is probably likely just with a peg. I feel, going back to the topic I mentioned before about being unable to remove the torso, I feel only the way to get around that is if you popped these arms out, removing them and freeing them from the sockets on the torso, remove the head off, and then simply you could just take the whole armor piece and slide it right off. Why I don't want to do that, though, is I don't know if there is going to be resistance to that. The last thing I certainly would want to do is break the peg that is keeping the arm obviously in place. And it's really, at the end of the day, more something I want to just display him with this anyways. I would probably never want to display Faker without it, even though there is a lot of detailing, to the credit of Mondo, that they did put on the inside there, sort of that spinning kind of computerized tape deck area. But unfortunately, like I said, just short of removing likely the arms and the head, I think is about the only way you could probably take that piece off. As for the arms, though, they rotate all the way around. One good thing is, because he's still using the same styling of armor here as Skeletor, it does mean that it's quite easy to rotate the arms all the way around. These flaps stay out of the way. He has a swivel at the bicep. He has only a single hinge in the elbow, and then you can also rotate the arm back and forth. It does kind of, the way you look at it, it does almost appear as if he's got a double hinge on the elbow, but it's simply just the way it's articulated to the bicep. That double hinge, it looks like, is actually just a single hinge, and this is the section here that just rotates for the forearm. The hands rotate all the way around. You can also hinge them back and forth. Periodically, while you're doing that, you may find the hands freeing themselves. You just want to pop those back in place. For his upper torso, he does have the upper torso ball joint, as well as he has a lower torso ball joint. And I know I didn't spend really nearly enough talking about the detailing done to Faker here. Like He-Man and Skeletor that we've had a look at, it's got some incredible airbrushing done, certainly to accent the muscle areas of his not only of his torso, his arms, for example, and more importantly, his legs. There's really a lot of cool airbrushing effects that they have really incorporated into the figure, and I really felt that I didn't spend nearly enough time talking about that, and I do apologize for that. Hopefully the video like this, you guys can really see some of the cool details that Mondo incorporates into these 6-scale He-Man figures. I mean, they really feel like premium pieces when you're having these in your collection. For the legs, though, the legs split out, and because this is that softer plastic material, it does allow those legs full range of motion, where you can move the legs freely forward and back. As I said, though, they do move forward and back, no issues whatsoever. He has a swivel, essentially at the top cut of the thigh where it attaches to the ball joint. Faker also does have a double hinge on the knee, good and tight joints. He has articulation technically sort of around the knee area as well. You can rotate the lower legs. And then he does also have articulation in the feet, where you can move them up and down, and you can also rock them back and forth. Faker, like the other He-Man figures that we've had a look at, the Masters of the Universe figures, does not have any peg holes on the undersides of his feet. Truth be told, the figure stands perfectly fine, really. Periodically, I mean, you may want to just make sure, because he is a very still heavy figure, that you want to make sure, of course, his feet are firmly flat and planted so he doesn't topple over. But generally, if you get the feet just right and the legs just right, I don't have any issues with these figures toppling over. And then again, here's just He-Man, so you guys can see the difference between them side to side. I mean, again, certainly if you loved the design elements of He-Man with the more modern take of what He-Man could look like as a 6-scale figure, then the logical step would simply just be to move on over to a Faker, which, like his classic counterpart, looks like He-Man in every way, shape, or form, except for, of course, the very obvious colors, which would tell you right off the bat, wait a minute, that's not He-Man. That's not He-Man at all. Faker has always been a popular character among fans of Masters of the Universe. I think more so, it even goes further than that. I think fans just generally like evil doppelgangers of the main good guy. For every He-Man, there's a Faker. For every Optimus Prime, there's a Nemesis Prime. And for every Kit, there's a Car. Yes, I did use a Knight Rider reference. Generally, though, they're not carbon copies to one another. Obviously, the viewing audience needs to be able to distinguish one from the other, so their color scheme may change slightly. For more traditional He-Man colors, Faker goes the route of more the Smurf pastel blue. Nemesis Prime sports an all jet black body. And of course, when it comes to kits, the inside dashboard has a different readouts. That little talking thing for car is a little bit different, and it's generally in yellow. Or in a lot of times, if the more easier route to go, you usually just have to sport an evil mustache. That seemed to always be the case back in the day. If you were an evil version of a character, you had to sport an evil mustache and drive a big, monstrous armored truck, or you have to come from the mirror universe. I basically have just described every example of a doppelganger. The point is, though, having perfected a He-Man in a 6-scale figure line, it would have made logical sense, and obviously Mondo went the route of producing an imposter for He-Man, and what better to make use of a great-looking mold already by giving him that blue color scheme, swapping out the armor a little bit, and giving us a pretty cool-looking Faker when it's all said and done. He doesn't have all the accessories that He-Man possesses, missing the broadsword, missing the small laser pistol, but those are things I would never really display with the figure anyways. He comes with the more important things, the battle axe, the shield, that is unfortunately is still a little too heavy for these figures to properly hold on to. And he comes, if you do manage to get the exclusive version of Faker, he comes with a pretty cool battle-damaged head sculpt, which has a rather familiar-looking endoskeleton skull underneath that. I wonder if that was a nod to Terminator. But really a nice overall design of Faker, not likely going to be displaying him with the exclusive head sculpt. But gosh darn it, I gotta admit, that head sculpt does look pretty cool indeed. If you guys are in the market of picking up the Mondo Faker for yourself, I'll provide the link down below. You can head on over to Mondo's website, where Faker is currently available, and you can most definitely add him to your cart. If you are in the market of getting the exclusive version, it is available, but of a more limited quantity. But it does at least give you a pretty cool looking head sculpt that you can swap out from the default that comes included with the figure. If you did manage to pick up this one for yourself, let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of it. Or based on this review, what do you guys think of the Mondo Masters of the Universe Faker exclusive figure? I have to wonder if there is an evil doppelganger of me out there. The irony would be is it would be a good doppelganger. I'll just kind of leave that with you. If you guys are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and keep your peepers peeled, because there's certainly going to be a lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.